Hello and welcome to Cox Connections. I'm your host, Gary McCullum, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Cox, Virginia. Recently, Cox Business held an executive discussion series called When the Unthinkable Happens, Making the Best of a Worst-Case Scenario, as a way to help local businesses be prepared when disaster strikes. Experts from the Hampton Roads area imparted their knowledge on how to best manage and survive a disaster. Among the panelists who are joining me today are Jim Reddick, Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response for the City of Norfolk, and Robert Conley, who leads, manages, and develops strategic and tactical security, risk safety, and business continuity plans here at Cox, Virginia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let me start, either one of you, as part of the panel of experts at that discussion series, what were you hoping to impart to the audience?
Well, there's two things in particular that I was hoping to impart. One is don't get caught up in complacency. When we talk about the hazards that we face as a community, everyone thinks of hurricanes, winter storms, and the like, but complacency is really at the top of the list because there's often the thought it won't happen here. So as long as we can let folks know it can and will happen, but also that we need to get together as a community, build the relationships so we're resilient to anything that comes our way.
You know, there's some terms that are thrown around. You hear emergency planning, and then you hear business continuity planning. Or is there a difference between the two?
There is a difference. When I think of emergency planning, I'm thinking about the hazard that we're facing, steps that we can take to mitigate that hazard, and how we're going to respond and recover from it. The business continuity piece is operations still need to take place. So if your facility is impacted, what steps do you have in place to carry on those operations?
Yeah, and Bert, clearly, you're doing this for Cox. Natural disasters, they are a threat not only to our business, but to anyone running a business. What are the possible dangers that a typical business needs to keep in mind if they're thinking about these disasters that Jim just spoke of?
The great news with our governmental partners, they've already done the hazard mitigation. They've done the homework up front for the businesses in the area. And so instead of trying to go out there and learn what are your threats in the area, the threats have already been identified and been mapped out by the government. And now you can look at those threats and look at your business operations and tailor your mitigation plans around those threats.
If there's a severe weather event, loss of communications, how are you going to contact employees? There are a whole host of things that businesses have to deal with in those kind of environments.
Right. The lessons have been taught. We've seen Hurricane Katrina, we've seen Hurricane Sandy, where you're exactly right. Businesses were out of business for a certain amount of time because some of their personnel had evacuated and they weren't able to get a hold of them, or a whole slew of things that they didn't prepare for. So again, the lessons have been taught. It's just a matter of if they've been learned.
We've heard the saying, if you don't have a plan, you're planning to fail.
Yes. I'm guilty of sharing that one, and Jim and I talk about that often. And the one thing we were trying to do with Executive Business Series is really draw that educational awareness. We still are seeing too many folks out there that think that it won't happen to us. That won't happen here. And so if you don't have a plan, you have that mentality, then your essence is going to fail. And so you have to have that plan. Look at the mitigation threats. Jim's right. The lessons have already been learned. Let's learn from those mistakes that were made, those opportunities, and let's take care of our employees, take care of our business, take care of the community, and have that resiliency that we can get back to operational status.
And so without this plan, you're going to make, from a business perspective, or even individually, your family, you're going to make some bad assumptions.
Absolutely. Yep. A good friend of mine has always said, hope is not a strategy. And he's exactly right, because like you said, if you don't take the steps to plan, and plans are just plans. And a quote that we used during the seminar was from Mike Tyson: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So a disaster, by its very definition, means that there's going to be things that your plan didn't account for. But as long as you have the relationships in place, you have your structures in place, and you have a guideline to follow, you're going to be a lot better off than otherwise.
Talk a little bit about the importance of building relationships on this side of the disaster, on the front end. Why is that so critical?
Well, for me, from a local emergency management standpoint, in our emergency operations center, we rely on the whole community. Our approach is a community approach: public, private, not-for-profit, higher education, military, all of us working together, because we're going to get hit by something. And if we're not working together, if we're not consistent, we have that unity of effort, then we're going to fail. And we're going to have to rely on a lot of outsiders to come in, where we have a lot of capabilities and a lot of talents here within the community. And it's just as long as we build those relationships, which we get through the planning process, that's how we know who we're going to call. We're not exchanging business cards at the disaster. We go through it together and we rebuild together.
Jim nailed it very, very, very well. The key to that is part of that planning process, having those relationships. You want to have those partnerships up front before the event happens. We're all in this together. We all want the same result. We want to take care of our employees, take care of our communities that we serve in, and have a solid plan to mitigate life safety concerns. And it's so important in a sterile environment to build those relationships up front and have that plan, put that as part of your planning process. So when the event comes, there are going to be things that you didn't account for. It happens. Yeah. But if you have a plan, have that baseline, have the relationships, when you come across an obstacle you can't overcome, you have a lifeline with your partners, whether it be with the government or other key businesses, where we can come together as a team.
The business continuity planning process, it's more than, I guess, just simply, putting a plan in place and putting it on a shelf. It's a living, breathing process. Talk a little bit about that, Bert, from Cox's perspective in terms of what we're doing to make sure that that thing stays alive and it's working and it's fresh.
Absolutely. It's definitely not a business continuity is not something you put on a 3-ring binder and you put it on the shelf and you break glass in the event of emergency. Business continuity is a living, breathing process. So what we do at Cox and we share with our government partners is have that plan, train, educate your employees, exercise your plan, capture your lessons learned, and then put back in your plan. It's a living, breathing process. We call it a cycle of life where you're capturing your plan, training and awareing your employees, have that education process, capture your lessons learned, and then you start all over again.
Is there a message here, Jim, for other businesses who may be listening to this in terms of what they should be doing around this BCP planning effort?
I would echo exactly what he said. Take it seriously because it can and will happen. Even if you don't have a plan, there are resources available. So you can visit readyhamptonroads.org or to get the information, contact information for your local emergency manager. There are templates out there. There's things that we can do to share and help you develop your plan. But you have to take it serious. You have to train on it. You have to exercise it. Otherwise, if it's just sitting on a shelf, it's not going to do anybody any.
What are some of the biggest mistakes people are making?
Really just not taking it serious, not putting it high enough on the priority list. It's going to cost too much money or too much time, when in fact it's really a step towards, it's an insurance document that'll help you really get through the toughest times.
Right. So it's not a matter of if some disaster is going to happen or some event, it's going to happen. And the question is whether or not you're going to be ready for it.
This past year, we've seen Hurricane Sandy, we've seen Boston bombings, we've seen active shooters, we've seen tornadoes, we've seen a slew of hazards. So they do happen. Well,
thank you, Jim. Bert, all you do in this area is very important. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.
After the break, are you a new parent or expecting a baby? Find out how this nonprofit organization is building a healthy community by helping parents to raise a healthy child. Stay tuned for more Cox Connections.